In this example, I want to go over the process of setting up a AWS web server in an EC2 instance, and then ultimately what we'll do from there is we will set up CloudWatch alarms to deal with the fact that our web server is going to have a period of low usage. So if people are not accessing the web server and we want to take action based on that, we'll have a CloudWatch alarm that actually restarts that service. And then additionally, we'll have another instance where we have a CloudWatch alarm where we end up with a high usage, and what we want to do is then take action based on a CloudWatch alarm for that. So both high usage and low usage, and then based on those alarms getting triggered, those CloudWatch alarms getting triggered, what we'd like to do is then notify people using the SNS notification system. So before we do that, though, I want to walk you through the process of actually setting up an AWS web server in EC2 manually so that when we programmatically do it, it's not anything that you haven't seen before. So I've started the AWS Learner Academy lab, and what I want to do is I want to jump over to AWS and I want to launch an EC2 instance. So in the recently visited, I'm going to go to EC2. And I'm going to go ahead and launch an instance. And the instance type that I want is Amazon Linux. And T3 Micro is fine for the instance type. The key pair login, so when I create a key pair login, so I will go ahead and create the key pair login. I'm just going to call this Advanced Scripting Cloud. Okay, and I'll create that key pair. I do want to be a little bit careful when I save this, so I want to save it into my downloads. I'll save it in my documents, and I'll save it in my development folder in this AWS folder. Okay, so I've saved it, and I'm not changing anything, but since I am making it a web server, I'm going to allow HTTPS and HTTP traffic from the internet, accessing it from anywhere. SSH traffic I'm going to allow as well because that's what I'm going to use to manage this server. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this instance. Okay, and it looks like I have two running instances now. So this one's initializing right now. And I guess this one I'm no longer using, so while this is initializing, I'm going to go ahead and terminate it. Sorry, I'm going to instance state to terminate it. And I guess the stopped instance I can terminate as well. So I'm just doing some manual management of it. It looks like my instance is now running. So I'm going to go ahead and select that instance. And what I want to do is I want to connect to the instance. The instance I can connect either through the public IP address or the public DNS address. Either one is fine. But I can get some detail about the connection. So if I go to this connect button, it'll tell me, oh, you should connect with an SSH client. It tells me to locate my private key file. So I know that I've downloaded my private key file because I'm going to use that essentially as my credentials to connect to my web server. It tells me that I have to change the permissions to 400 on that key file. So because I saved it into my profile directory, I think the key permissions are going to be okay. If not, I'll go ahead and run that chmod 400 command on that key file. But basically what this is saying is that the owner of the file, so this 4, indicates that the owner of the file can read the file but can't write or execute. And then the group associated with it, so this middle digit, is indicating that they can't read, write, or execute. So people in the group cannot read, write, or execute. And then anyone who's not in the ownership or in the group associated with that file also has no access to the file. Okay, so I get a sample script here about how to connect to that EC2 instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to a terminal window. And I'm actually going to change my working directory into that location where I downloaded the key file. So I believe that was in my documents and then development, and then AWS. Okay, so this is where I downloaded that key file. And then because I'm currently in that working directory, the relative path to this file is just the current directory, so I don't have to put any path on it. And you'll notice the way it's working here is it's going to create a user account called EC2-user at that public DNS address. Okay, so I should be able to take this command now because I'm in that same directory and paste it in, and I do want to connect. And you'll see that it's complaining that I have bad permissions on the key file. So because that key file does not have 400 permissions, we can actually look at the key file. So the key file was advanced scripting cloud.pem, and you'll notice that the owner can read and write. So that's my account. I'm the owner, B. Witkowski. I can read and write. That's what this R and W is indicating. And then I don't have the execute permission. So that dash there indicates that I don't have the execute permission. The group can read. So you can see the R, but then the W and X are dashed out, and then everyone else can also read, so the W and X are also dashed out. So the permissions right now are 644, so basically that key file is too open. So what I want to do is I want to do a chmod of 400 of that advanced scripting. Okay, and then if I look at the permissions again, now you'll notice that only the owner can read and then no one else has access to the file. So now that I've changed the permissions, now I should be able to connect using that SSH command. Okay, so now you can see I'm connected to that Amazon Linux instance, the EC2 instance. And what I want to do is I want to do an install on this server so that I actually have a web server running. And the web server, I typically am more of a Ubuntu user, and that package manager to install packages in Ubuntu is apt. With Amazon Linux, they'll use yum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a yum-y update to update the package manager. Okay, and it tells me that I have to do that as an administrative user. So what I can do is I can run that same command, and I have administrative rights as this user account EC2-user. So I have administrative access. I just have to invoke it by putting sudo in front of that command. So the shortcut that I'm going to use is sudo ! And what that'll do is it'll run the previous command that I just tried to execute, so this yum-y update. It'll run that previous command with that sudo in front of it, so as the super user. Okay, so now it's going to do that update. So what that's doing is it's updating the package manager. Okay, so it looks like it's okay there. And then what I should be able to do is I should be able to do a yum-y install, and I want to install a couple of different packages. So I want to install HTTPD, which is my Apache web server. I'm going to install PHP. I'm going to install wget, and I'm going to install unzip. Okay, and again, it's telling me, hey, you have to run that command with super user privileges, so I'm just going to use sudo ! And it's going to download all of those files. Okay, so it looks like it was successful. And then what I want to do is, now that I have that, I want to enable my Apache web server. So I'm going to say, go to the user directory, bin, system control. I'm going to enable HTTPD. So I'm enabling that service, and you'll see I get that access denied error. So let's try to run that same command as the super user. Okay, so now I have that web server enabled, and what I'm hoping is that if I go back over to my instance, so I'm looking at my instance, I should be able to copy this public IP address and open it in a browser window. And it doesn't look too promising there. I think um, I skipped a step here. The one step that I skipped is that I actually have to start that service. So I enabled the service, but I also have to then, once I've enabled that service, I have to start it. Okay, and now I think now my Apache web server is going to be running, and you'll see that I get that it works. Okay, so what's happening here is when I go out to a browser and I type in that IP address, what's going on is I'm actually going to my EC2 instance. The EC2 instance is set up so if I go down to security, you'll see these inbound rules. Remember when I launched the instance, I chose to allow port 80 and 443 traffic to come through. Port 80 and port 443 are special ports. 443 allows HTTPS traffic, and port 80 allows HTTP traffic to access my web server. So basically these inbound rules are the firewall, and the firewall is allowing traffic through to my web server. And what happens is when I come out to my browser, I type in this IP address, I'm basically saying I'm making an HTTP request to my web server, to my EC2 instance. I get to the Amazon firewall, and the firewall allows that traffic to then access my server. My server now has the HTTPD service, Apache 2 service running on it, and it can then respond with this HTML page that says it works. Okay, if I go out to my terminal window again, and I'm just going to clear the window, where it's actually rendering that from is if I go to the cd var www HTML folder, and I do a directory listing here, this is where it's actually rendering that file from. Okay, so it's rendering that it works from this file. So what I can do now is if I look ahead at the lab, what happens is I actually download a zip file. Okay, so I'm looking at the week 5 assignment. Okay, and in the week 5 assignment, if I scroll down enough, eventually you get to the point where you're going to do this wget. So when we installed some packages, we installed wget. Basically what this does is it downloads some files. It downloads this zip file. So if I come over here, I should be able to run that wget command. And you'll notice I get error, permission denied. So if I try to run that same command as an administrator, as the super user. Okay, now if I do a directory listing, you'll see that I have this lab-app.zip. I should be able to do an unzip of the lab app.zip, and then I can specify where I want to extract it to. I want to extract it to the same directory. And, interesting, I left out a character. I want to specify the directory where I want to extract it to. And you'll notice it complains that it can't do that because I have a permission denied error. So I'm just going to run the previous command as an administrator. Okay, so I clear this and I do a directory listing, and now you'll see that I have all of these files sitting out on my file system. Now I should be able to come over here. And now you'll see this application that's going to allow me to do this load test. And this load test is one of the things that you're going to run so that if you remember back at the beginning of the video, I said that your EC2 instance has essentially two conditions that we want to check for, or we want to set alarms for. The first is that the EC2 instance is not getting used, so low utilization. And then the second is where we have high utilization. So we'll use this load test to trigger the high utilization alarm. Okay, so when you run that load test, it's going to rev up the CPU utilization, and then it's going to trigger that CloudWatch alarm saying, hey, this server is getting used heavily and an action should take place, and a CloudWatch alarm is going to get triggered. Okay, so all of those steps that we configured manually. So if you remember, I'm just going to hit the up arrow here. right? So I'm just hitting the up arrow, kind of going through all these steps. We did this yum update, we did the yum install, we enabled HTTPD, and then we started HTTPD, and then we downloaded some files and unzipped those files. So we do all that, and ultimately what we do is we're setting up a website. Okay, and we want to programmatically do all of those things. Okay, so we want to launch our EC2 instance. We want to programmatically set up our web server and do that download and enable HTTP and start HTTPD. We want to do all those things to make this a web server. The only portion of this that we're not going to automate is, if you remember when we launched the instance, we set up these inbound rules. So what it does is it actually creates a security group. So our security group right here is Launch Wizard 2. You can manually create this security group. If you want to jump in and actually build out that security group programmatically, you're welcome to do that. But the Week 5 assignment does not require that. It's just kind of a thing that we skip over. So I'm going to use Launch Wizard 2 in a future video, because what that does is it has the inbound rules already set up so that we can trigger that high CPU utilization by using our website that has this load tester that will ramp up the CPU load. Okay, so basically all this stuff that we did manually, we next want to do programmatically or in an automated fashion.